Hello everybody, I'm Ard, and welcome to another episode of Minecraft Enigmatica 2 Expert. Today, you might think that we're going to continue on magic to get caught up and finally get our Elven Gateway made. Well, no, we're not going to do that at all. We're going to do some progress for the sake of progress and get some of the quest book finished out for stuff that we just frankly don't really need at this point to get it done. So what we're going to do is go delve into forestry. And inside forestry, you can see that we've done almost nothing, pretty much just the bare minimum machinery we need to do all the other mod packs, which leaves us a bunch of stuff that we're not going to use, like various engines that we're not going to use, various things to make fuel for those engines that we're not going to use, a farm that I actually really like that we're not going to use. You get the idea. Bees, which we will use, but not the way we use them in every other mod pack for the most part. So let's just get started on this. So I figured we would start by banging out the generators and the machines that power them. Starting with the Clockwork engine, which we are well past needing because this is a manually wound up one. And it's really, really simple to make. We're well past the ability to make this. And no sooner mentioned, but finished. So this is the first one of the things we're going to shove into a box and forget. Next, let's make the fermenter, which processes things into biomass. And it isn't any more complicated to make. The big thing is it requires treated wood, which we're long since making, and sturdy casings, which we've been getting tons of out of loot chests that we are long since past needing. And this one is just as easily finished, although we probably should discuss this one because this isn't as useless as the last one. So the main thing that this is for making biomass. And you might notice that it has 600 pages of recipes, and these all make various plants into various amounts of biomass combined with water or juices of various sorts, which is why there's so many combinations. In addition to providing the fluid and the fruit that you're using, you also need to include a type of compost as well to produce biomass. The fluid determines how much biomass you get out of it. The compost versus fertilizer versus mulch is how long it lasts. They're good for more than one run each. I should also note that hidden in those 600 some recipes, there are also 2 recipes to make mead as well, from honeydew from certain types of forestry bees. And from all accounts, it's pretty much a complete rubbish food. It's entirely possible I should make some just to try to get a heart out of it, but it's pretty bad. Anyhow, on to what consumes the biomass from it, the biogas engine. And the biogas engine is also pretty simple to make. It just requires some bronze. And done with this as well. And this is actually a pretty interesting engine. It requires lava to bootstrap it up, but depending on the fuel you use, it doesn't actually consume the lava, it only needs it to start it, which is the not warmed up warning over here. It can take a variety of fuels. Obviously, the main one you would want is biogas. Some of the other ones will also keep it from consuming the lava, including things like honey. If you use milk or water, well, it'll consume the lava, so I don't understand the point of that. This is a decent early game engine. I would not use this later game. It only produces a relatively small amount of power. I don't know what it produces in this pack, to be completely honest. It might be worth doing here, but it just doesn't seem worth the effort to automate. And onto the Peat-fired engine, which consumes peat. And to make this one is even easier than the biogas one because it's copper instead of bronze. And another one finished, and we probably should discuss this. So how these work is they consume peat, which can be made in a peat bog farm in a multi-farm. So you can consume bog earth, turns it into peat and dirt, and bog earth is sand combined with dirt and water. It also slowly turns into peat. It left soaking your water for a while. In normal Minecraft, this generates a relatively low amount of power, even in the Peat-fired one, and I've never felt the need to ever make these because they're just kind of a giant pain to make. You can upgrade the peat to bituminous peat using other forestry materials that aren't too hard to get, but again, I don't really see the point. It's more work than it's worth, in my opinion. So there's that. You're not going to see me put together one of these farms. And now onto the still, because why produce biomass when we can produce alcohol? So this turns the biomass into alcohol to fuel the bio generator. And the still is really, really easy to make and just as easily finished. So in this pack, you can either use it for the intended use of biomass into ethanol, or you can pump canola oil into it and turn it into refined canola oil for the canola press in actually additions. pretty limited uses, but honestly the canola oil is a fairly good source of early game power, although if memory serves, it's a pretty large pain to actually automate it all the way up. Now up to the Bio Generator to round out the power generation for forestry. And this apparently generates EU instead of RF, which that's interesting and I didn't realize. But it's also really easy to make and well within our means. And that one's done now too, and we've rounded out the power for this pack. And this is just exactly like it appears. It consumes ethanol or biomass and turns it into power. And all this stuff now gets exiled to a box. Alright, back to it. Next we're going to make the Rainmaker, which pretty much does exactly what it says. It starts and stops rain. This might actually be useful to me because snow here is really annoying and I really need to do something about that. But the Rainmaker is also pretty simple to make. It requires hardened cases, but we can replicate those, or we can just make them because they're not that hard. Some kin gears and some glass, all stuff that again is also really simple. And another one done. To the best of my knowledge, this doesn't actually require power, it just requires the capsules that it uses. And the capsules are both mentioned right here. The first is the iodine capsule, which you can make in the Carpenter using products from bees. And the other is the dissipation charge, which is similar, but requires royal jelly, which requires higher tier bees than we have, which I really do need to make. And now back on to the starting of the farms. And we start by making circuit boards, which just makes the basic circuit board to start with. The instructions are generally here on the right, and to make the circuit board is pretty easy in the Carpenter. If you're also going to actually use these in a farm, you're going to need to make a soldering iron, which is just iron and bronze inside the Carpenter as well. Next up are the Electron tubes, which we have long since made because they're used in some of the other machines. And we've already made most of the upgraded ones for these. From there, we need the blazing Electron tubes, however, which would be hard except we already have a very ready source of blaze powder. And these just go in the thermionic fabricator. Alright, next up are the Forestry multi-block farms, which this is actually one of my favorite farm types, just from a pure aesthetic standpoint. I really like the way these look and kind of operate, versus like just how the industrial foregoing one works, where it's just kind of generic looking. That said, they're a much bigger pain to set up and make, because in theory you need to supply it with power, water, and in theory fertilizer, and then you need to configure to do the correct things. I'm just going to make the blocks to complete this, however, unless I decide to move my farms outside, since I've already got the industrial foregoing one set up inside a compact machine as is. So we're just going to leave that alone for the time being and just get this done. Most of these are pretty easy, although they do require things like electron tubes and a whole lot of gears, but for the most part it's pretty simple. Alright, and that's all of the pieces for the multi-farm made. Next we're going to make a flexible casing, which is used to make non-multi-block farms, and I'm going to do this, but I honestly have never gotten these farms to work and I don't know how they actually operate. But as you can see, it's slime balls, emeralds, and bronze in the thermionic fabricator. Alright, so I made it, but I'm also not a fan of the fact that it was shoved in as one of the quests for this pack with zero explanation of how any of it actually works. So let's take a quick look at what it's used in. And the answer are these farms right here, these standalone ones. They each are like single purpose manager manual farms that do different types. That said, I've never been able to get these to work. I don't actually know how they operate. The multi-block one, yeah, those ones are, once you understand how they're put together, are pretty easy. But this, I'm at a complete loss on. But if you go in here, they're actually pretty simple. They're pretty much driven by which type of electron tubes you put inside of it. And continuing right along through our speed run through forestry. Next up, we dive back into the bees. And while I'm going to go finish these out, we're going to probably do another whole episode on bees by themselves in the not too far off future, just to explain how they work and how to use Gendustry to speed you through it. But first up, we need to build an apiary, which is different than the bee house we used outside way back in one of the first episodes. And the apiary is pretty simple to make. It's just wood, an impregnated casing, and slabs. And in case you don't remember the impregnated casing, it's just oak soaked in olive oil or seed oil, which we have long since set up. Alright, and the apiary is complete, and I'm back outside where my other bee house is to show you the difference between the two real fast. So looking in the bee house, you can see that I have drones, a spot for a queen, and just outputs. And we put things back here, they just churn forever. We don't need to care if this is an ignoble stock bee or not. If we come into the apiary, you see that we have the same slots, but we also have these 3 slots for frames. And these matter because these bees do matter if they're ignoble or pristine queens, because the queen, if they're ignoble, will eventually die, which means you want to use a pristine that has the correct traits for the correct kinds of bees you're using. We'll get into this later. And then you also load in frames that determine how fast the bees cycle through the apiary and how much honey and byproducts they give. The next step would be the centrifuge that we've already made. And what you do with the centrifuge is you just put your combs in here and it will process them slowly, kicking out whatever pollen or honey that they generate or other byproducts into this inventory here. And the next step is to make the portable analyzer, which lets you analyze bees, trees, and butterflies to tell you what their various genetics are. And overall, it's pretty simple to make. All right, and the portable analyzer is done as well. And the way this works is you right click it, you put in some honey drops, so you already have to have got your bee production going in a bee house probably. And then the type of bee you want to look, currently says unknown genome, we'll put it in here. It shows us what 2 types of genes it has. It's active and passive ones that it can pass on to others when it is crossbred with another species. So in this case, we could take this monastic bee, put it with something that has increased fertility or is a faster producer, and potentially increase the ability of this particular bee. All right, and the last step, the Apiarist armor, which protects you from getting poisoned or stung by certain types of bees, specifically the tropical bees, which it takes to be able to make this, because it requires woven silk, which requires silk wisp, which requires silky propolis, which comes out of silky combs, which comes out of tropical bees, or valiant ones, but those are upgraded ones. This is the part where I laugh maniacally and tell you to kidnap villagers, folks, for real. I've brought this up before, but some of these Apiarist villagers can give you silky combs, and this lets you shortcut this whole process of trying to get tropical bees that are useful in a tropical biome, or building up to the better beehive that lets you do climate control in it. It is a gigantic pain, versus just kidnapping a villager and mugging him for his combs repeatedly over and over and over until you have enough to just make the whole set. I should note that these silk wisps do have other uses. They're used in gendistry stuff, as well as upgrading the forestry backpacks to their bigger forms, so from 15 slots to 45. If you have a dank null, this is kind of irrelevant unless you really want to slot things into different sources, but this is another use for them. And with this, we've finished out forestry, or at least the quest chapter as far as the game is concerned. All done other than collecting the loot chests. So 16 chests, let's pop them and see what we get. More blocks, bookshelves, mana steel. Oh, resonant conversion kit though, that's pretty nice for free. That just takes machines straight up to the top tier for thermal expansion. More blocks, another upgrade kit for thermal expansion that I don't need. Food we've eaten, food we haven't eaten, food we've eaten. Oh, free range collector though, that's nice. Another door. Spawner seeker, which would be nice if I didn't already have several of these. Charge cord fixer, which I think I've been confused by before and don't know if this is actually good or not. Another Manaseer monocle. Sponges. Are you kidding me? Eyes of Ender. Well, that was a mostly unexciting batch of loot chests, so, but you know what we did get? A nice shiny checkbox next to forestry, done and done. Oh, and apparently another one for actually additions, probably due to the range collector. Yep, it wants me to do one more. Crafting unit, which I think we've already got. All right, anyhow, that's still fairly good progress though, folks. We finally cleared out another one of the chapters. As always, I'm Ard. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.